Hi, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us for the launch of the USGS National Water Availability Assessment. I'm Meg Shoda. I'll be your host for today's event. I'm a hydrologist in the USGS Water Mission area. I want to let everyone know at the start of the event that this meeting is being recorded and it'll be made available to you after. Let's walk through how we're going to learn about national scale advancements in water availability during today's event. First, we'll hear opening remarks from the director of the U.S. Geological Survey, Dr. David Applegate. Then we'll share how novel USGS science and modeling are answering questions like, do we have enough water? And how does water quality impact water availability? We'll also talk about our approach for integrating the different components of water availability and how you can learn more by accessing our results directly. These parts of today's events are going to feature the USGS scientists who have been part of pioneering these advancements. We'll hear from Lori Sprague, Program Manager of the Integrated Water Availability Assessments Program in the Water Mission Area. Ted Stets, a research ecologist with the Water Mission Area. Mindy Erickson, a research hydrologist with the Upper Midwest Water Science Center. And Shirley Leung, a product owner in the Water Mission Area. Throughout the presentation, we'll ask for your feedback a couple of times, and we'll end today's event with a question and answer session. Please submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A button at the top of your Teams event window. And with that, I'm so pleased to welcome our guest, David Applegate, to this event. Director Applegate is the 18th Director of the U.S. Geological Survey. He has a background in geology, and in addition to his current role, he's led the USGS in natural hazards and coastal and marine programs. Thank you, Director Applegate, for opening this special event.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today for the release of the USGS National Water Availability Assessment Report. On behalf of our Associate Director for Water, Bill Werkheiser, and our tremendous staff in our Water Resources Mission Area and in our water science centers across the nation, I want to say a big welcome to our interagency partners and the incredibly diverse family of external stakeholders who use USGS science. We want to see our science put to work, and you are the ones who do that. I want to acknowledge that wherever you are joining us from today is Indigenous land, part of the homeland of Native peoples who were the first conservation stewards of this incredible landscape and waterscape. I'd like to offer a special thank you to Bill and his team for their hard work and dedication to bringing this nationally significant report to fruition. In particular, my thanks to 3 USGS staff members who led the entire National Water Availability Assessment effort, who you'll be hearing from shortly, Lori Sprague, Ted Stets, and Meg Shoda. Understanding and reporting water availability is a key part of the USGS Water Resources Mission Area's mission. The U.S. faces growing challenges to its water availability, and we need to know where there's not enough water, where we have more than we need, and the quality of the water. The National Water Availability Assessment is a comprehensive, integrated scientific assessment of water availability in the conterminous United States. This assessment was authorized by the Secure Water Act of 2010, and it's the first of its kind as it provides new water availability information, including innovative insights on areas of imbalance between water supply and demand in the U.S. I'll offer 2 key takeaways from the report. From 2010 to 2020, nearly 30 million people lived in areas where water use was a high percentage of surface water supply, indicating a high degree of local water limitation. And a higher proportion of the people living in areas of local water limitation were considered socially vulnerable compared with those living in areas with greater local water availability. Now, central to the USGS mission is delivering actionable information, and that means delivering it in ways that can be easily used. To that end, the assessment includes an online data companion that's a user-focused website to serve up the underlying data sets used in the assessment. It delivers USGS modeled information through tools that scientists, policymakers, resource managers, and others can use to retrieve information to better understand the state of water across the United States. The data companion will also provide nationally consistent, routinely updated water quantity, water quality, and water use information. Thanks to new capabilities we've been able to bring to bear, the assessment allows people to evaluate water availability across the nation at a higher level of detail than ever before. Prior USGS national water availability assessments relied on data only from locations where water was directly measured. The new assessment uses state-of-the-art models to fill in the gaps between monitoring locations. Prior USGS national water availability assessments examined water quality and water use separately. The new assessment brings them together to evaluate water availability more comprehensively. The new assessment also includes an interactive website to highlight some key ways in this report can provide information in an engaging and accessible way. The interactive website is designed for broad audiences and is an easy entry point for all audiences to access the report and the data companion. There is much to explore. So with that, I'm going to again say thank you for joining us. Thanks for the opportunity to help kick off this event. And now let's hear from the experts who've been involved in making this report happen. So Meg, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Director Applegate. Next up, we're going to hear from Lori Sprague, the Program Manager for the USGS Integrated Water Availability Assessments, and we'll hear Lori talk about the motivation to undertake this national assessment. Lori, you have the mic.
Thanks, Meg. Good afternoon, or if you're here in the Western United States like I am, good morning. If you are following the news, it's hard to miss. Water availability is an issue everywhere in our country and beyond. And it raises the question, do we have enough water to sustain our nation's economy, ecosystems, and drinking water supplies? As Director Applegate just spoke to, the U.S. Congress asked USGS to answer this question through the Secure Water Act. In response, we've developed an integrated water availability assessment, which estimates water supply and water demand, reports on why supply and demand have changed through time, and helps identify challenges our nation may have in meeting its demand for water, either due to a lack of quantity or poor water quality. For the first time, USGS can answer this question at the national scale. We do this through the supply and use index that's shown here. It takes into account both supply and demand, and we looked at the period between 2010 and 2020. You can think of this index as a measure of water limitation, where areas that are brighter yellow are more water limited. Getting to the information that you see on this map was no small feat. So now I want to hand the mic to Ted Stets, who led the analysis and writing team for the National Assessment Report, and he's going to tell you more about the initial findings.
Thank you, Lori. So how do we estimate water limitation? Water limitation is the difference between how much water is supplied and how much water is in demand. We measure and model surface water and compare that to water demand for human uses. First, we'll look at water supply. In the lower 48 states, nearly 5,000 billion gallons of water fall in the form of precipitation each day. Most of that water re-enters the atmosphere through evapotranspiration. And about a quarter of our daily water input ends up as stream flow to the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, to Canada, or to the Gulf of Mexico. Water supply varies in time and space. This chart shows the surface water supply, which is represented by average runoff in surface waters of the major hydrologic regions of the lower 48 states. Of these hydrologic regions, the Pacific Northwest has by far the highest surface water supply. The Pacific Northwest water supply is an order of magnitude higher than the drier hydrologic regions shown. Regions with the lowest water supply are considered arid or semi-arid. This includes regions like the Southern High Plains, the Central High Plains, Texas, and the Southwest Desert. A general pattern we observed in the data was that hydrologic regions with low precipitation and little storage coincided with aquifer systems that have decreasing groundwater levels during the period of our analysis. Next, we'll look at water use. An understanding of withdrawals of water, how much, where, and for what purpose is fundamental to the evaluation of the nation's water availability. It's a large undertaking to quantify just how much water is used at a national scale. The USGS has been estimating water use for decades, and new modeling approaches being developed by the USGS provide better temporal and spatial resolution on our water use estimates. And this gives us a more complete picture of water use in the United States. Looking at water supply and demand together, we can see that demand is less variable than supply. But what really matters is the imbalance between the two. In the regions near the top of this chart, supply far exceeds demand, and the chance of water limitation is low. In the regions near the bottom of the chart, supply and demand are much closer, and water limitation is much more likely. It's important to remember that these are long-term regional averages. Most regions have specific areas or specific times that are more likely to experience water limitation. When supply and demand are closely matched, it's more likely that those conditions will be met and water limitations will occur. Next, we'll look at how much water is used and for what purpose. Public supply, power generation, and irrigation for crops. These are the big three categories of water use. Together, they account for about 90% of all of the water that's used annually. Public supply is the smallest category among the big three, but this one is probably the most visible to most of us because it represents the water that flows from our taps at home, at work, and at school. Public supply has been stable over the analysis period, but this masks a few important trends. USGS scientists discovered that how much water each person uses is decreasing. So while the population grows, water used for public supply remains stable. Thermoelectric power generation uses water that is withdrawn from the environment to produce power. Typically, this is done by heating the water to create pressurized steam. Thermoelectric water use has been decreasing since 2010. And this is largely driven by a shift away from once-through cooling systems and toward recirculating cooling systems that reuse the same water multiple times before returning it to the environment. Irrigation for crops is the largest use of water. The amount of water used for crops is closely related to climate conditions. In drier years like 2012, there was less precipitation and more water was used for irrigation. It takes more water to maintain crop production in dry years, so water storage can be drawn down and the areas that are experiencing water limitation can expand. Combining the largest sources of water, there is an overall decrease in water withdrawals since 2012, and this is mostly due to the decrease in withdrawals for thermoelectric power. Not all of the water that's withdrawn for human water use returns to the local environment. Some of the water is lost because it is evaporated, transpired, incorporated into products or crops, or otherwise made unavailable for immediate use. Water use that does not return to the local environment is called consumptive use. Crop irrigation accounted for 90% of all of the consumptive losses during 2010 to 2020. Whereas thermoelectric and public supply each accounted for a small fraction of the consumptive use. With improved modeling, the USGS can now deliver water use information at higher spatial and temporal resolution than in the previous assessments. Here we see average daily use in 2020 across the largest categories. Thermoelectric withdrawals are shown in circles and are much larger in the eastern half of the country. This includes both freshwater withdrawals and saline withdrawals in the coastal areas. Public supply is concentrated around more populated areas. Crop irrigation, shown in yellow, is the highest in regions like the central and southern high plains, the Mississippi embayment, and the Central Valley in California, which is located in the western part of the California-Nevada region, which is highlighted on this slide. We also tend to see the most prevalent water limitation in areas of intense crop irrigation. On this map, we're looking at the supply and use index, which represents the balance between natural supplies and consumptive use for human needs. Areas with high or severe average water limitation, which are shown in yellow here, cover about 6% of the lower 48 states. About 27 million people live in areas that have high or severe water limitation. In some places, the balance between supply and demand is adequate, but stream flow is altered in ways that are harmful to the local ecological community. For example, the Northeast hydrologic region has the highest percentage of river miles with altered ecoflows, even though the water supply there is very high. Ecoflow alteration can also affect areas that experience moderate or high water limitation, like Florida and the Central High Plains. With these first-of-their-kind water limitation data, we can start to explore other factors associated with water limitation, where it's distributed, how it overlaps with population, and other socioeconomic factors. This is explored in greater depth within the report. One notable finding was that a higher proportion of the people living in areas of local water stress were considered to be socially vulnerable compared with those living in areas with greater water availability.
Thanks, Ted. Next, we want to hear from you. So please go to the event Q&A and tell us what your top concern is related to water. You might be a resource manager, a partner at another federal agency. We have some journalists on the call today or a community member. So regardless of your role, we want to hear from you. So please go ahead and tell us what your thoughts are. And while those are coming in through the Q&A, we'll hear from USGS research hydrologist Mindy Erickson. Mindy's going to talk about a common water concern, and that's water quality.
Thanks, Meg. We can also see from the headlines that water quality is an important factor that affects and sometimes limits water availability. This is why USGS national assessments have incorporated water quality and ecosystem health as key factors in assessing water availability. The threats to water quality differ depending on water usage. For example, drinking water requires a different quality to be acceptable versus what is acceptable for recreation. And water quality threats vary with water source. For example, the most common surface water contaminants are different than the most common groundwater contaminants. Water quality problems can be a significant water availability consideration, and contaminants can come from geological sources, human sources, or both. Let's take a look at common groundwater contaminants first. The gray shading on this map shows the most used principal aquifers of the US. About 140 million people, more than 1/3 of the nation's population, rely on groundwater for drinking water, either from public supply wells or domestic wells. These aquifers provide most of the groundwater sourced drinking water. USGS produced a novel national scale assessment of groundwater contamination in principal aquifers. These pie charts represent water quality in each of the major drinking water aquifers. The darkest color shows the proportion of the aquifer area that had one or more groundwater contaminants at high concentration. That is, concentrations exceeding a human health benchmark. Moderate concentrations, shown in the medium color, exceed half of a human health benchmark. Drinking water for more than 35 million people is sourced from groundwater that is contaminated by a few geologic source contaminants or nitrate. High concentrations in groundwater can mean that public water suppliers must treat or blend water to meet EPA standards. Domestic well owners are responsible for testing and treating their own water because EPA does not regulate water quality for domestic wells. Let's take a closer look at the glacial aquifer system, highlighted here. The glacial aquifer system spans 25 states and serves as the drinking water supply for more people than any other aquifer. Over a quarter of the aquifer had groundwater contaminant concentrations that exceeded human health benchmarks, and about another quarter had moderate concentrations. In combination, almost half of the aquifer area has one or more contaminant concentrations exceeding or approaching human health benchmarks. Across the aquifers in the study, elevated concentrations of groundwater contaminants were widespread and often co-occurring, with multiple constituents detected at elevated levels in the same location. Contaminants from geologic sources, things like arsenic, manganese, strontium, and radionuclides, were much more prevalent at high or moderate concentrations than human source contaminants like nitrate. Now let's take a look at surface water. Like groundwater, surface water quality issues can be caused by both human and natural sources of contaminants. A major water quality concern for surface water is excess nutrients, including nitrogen and phosphorus. Excess nutrients can negatively affect aquatic ecosystem health by overstimulating growth of aquatic plants and algae, causing harmful algal blooms. Excess nutrients can also negatively affect human water use by limiting recreation on local lakes or rivers, or excess nutrients can create large areas of low oxygen or hypoxic zones that limit commercial fishing and affect ecosystem health. Notably, nutrient runoff from the Mississippi River Basin creates a large hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico each year, affecting fishing, recreation, and ecosystem health. Last summer, that hypoxic zone in the Gulf was roughly the size of New Jersey. We developed national scale models to better understand nutrient loading across the country. Nitrogen runoff from agriculture affects large parts of the US and results in degraded water quality and ecosystems in downstream waterways. Wastewater, atmospheric deposition, other human sources, and natural sources also contribute to nitrogen loading. The Midwest, Tennessee, Missouri, and Northeast regions have the highest total nitrogen loads compared to the other regions. When we look at the proportion of different sources of nitrogen loading across regions, other patterns emerge. Nitrogen runoff from agriculture affects large parts of the US and contributes to degraded water quality and ecosystems in local and downstream waterways. In the High Plains, Souris Red Rainy, and Midwest regions in the central parts of the country, a large portion of nitrogen in surface water comes from agriculture. Wastewater from treatment plants can be another significant contributor to nitrogen loading. In certain parts of the country, treated wastewater contributes as much or more nitrogen as agriculture does. Nutrients are more likely to exceed ecosystem benchmarks than drinking water benchmarks. In this map, we compare nutrient loading results to ecological benchmarks from the EPA to see what effect surface water nutrients are having. We found that nitrogen levels in most regions exceeded what is considered good, meaning close to a least disturbed ecological condition, shown in shades of green on the map. In fact, nitrogen concentrations are often more than 4 times higher than what is considered good for ecosystem health, shown in pink and maroon on this map. Geologic source contaminants and nitrogen are just a few of many water quality challenges facing our nation. This report includes discussions of water quality affected by organic contaminants and other inorganic contaminants. We include descriptions of contaminant mixtures and alternative water resources, such as wastewater reuse. We also developed interactive maps for many water quality constituents and water quality models, including new models of groundwater PFAS and lithium. The interactive maps are available online with the report. Now Ted will put the water availability pieces together. Ted?
Thank you, Mindy. As we bring these water quality results together with the water quantity results, we begin to get a more complete picture of water availability. In our assessments, we considered 4 different aspects of water availability: water quantity, surface water quality, groundwater quality, and ecoflow alteration. Water quantity, which we discussed earlier, is the supply and use index. This tells us how much of the water supply is consumed for human uses. Surface water quality is captured through the stream nitrogen and phosphorus modeling results that Mindy just discussed with us. Groundwater quality is addressed with national scale groundwater models for arsenic and nitrate. And lastly, we have ecoflow alteration, which is a measure of how changes in streamflow conditions affect local ecological communities. Now we can put all 4 of these categories together. On this slide, we're looking at the relative stress of each individual water availability component within each hydrologic region. Blues indicate low stress, and high stress is shown in orange and red. When we look at these water availability components together, we can see that the central and southern high plains in the Texas regions have the highest stress in multiple categories. The California-Nevada region has high stress in all categories. And every region has moderate stress or higher in at least one category. We can also see that elevated water stress in one category is usually associated with elevated stress in another category. This is because the ways in which water availability is limited are usually linked. High water use is often associated with some amount of water quality degradation. If a large percent of water supply is withdrawn, any pollutants in the water become magnified. The United States is facing unprecedented challenges to water availability. The USGS is providing novel and timely results to help inform decision makers across the country. In various parts of the nation, we have seen that water availability is potentially limited by low supply, by high demand, or by poor water quality. For example, about 27 million people were found to live in areas where water use is a high percentage of water supply, which indicates a high degree of water stress. A higher proportion of the people living in these areas are considered socially vulnerable compared with those living in areas with more water availability. Groundwater aquifers that provide about 1/3 of the public drinking water supplies were found to have high elevated concentrations of contaminants such as arsenic, manganese, radionuclides, and nitrate. Low-income and minority-dominated communities and people with domestic wells as their drinking water source experienced increased exposure to this type of contamination. There are also impacts to aquatic ecosystems. For example, 3 fish species of conservation concern were found to have limited water availability in a large percentage of their habitat range. This includes the Arkansas river shiner, the plains killifish, and the Utah sucker. Findings like these are critical to help the nation manage its water resources effectively.
Thanks, Ted. So one more time, we want to hear from you. Please enter into the Q&A which of these results are the most relevant for you. So what have you seen here that you want to dive deeper into? What do you want to learn more about? We have a really diverse group of people on the call today, and so we're interested in hearing about what results are resonating with you. Next, again, while you're putting those results into the Q&A, I'm going to hand the mic to Shirley Leung, the USGS product owner. Shirley is going to lead the last section of today's presentation, which is about where you can explore the information that you've seen today.
Thanks, Meg. So hi, everyone. Shirley here. I'll start to wrap us up today by talking about where you can go to read more about the results presented here, as well as to explore and learn about the data and visualizations underlying the results. So if you want to read the full interpretive report, which contains all of the information presented here today, you can go to the digital object identifier link shown here. For highlighted key findings and interactive data visualizations, you can check out water.usgs.gov/vislab/water-availability. And lastly, if you want to download the data yourself and learn more about the models that generate the data, you can visit the Data Companion website at water.usgs.gov/NWAA-data. All of these links will also be provided in the chat and the Q&A. So the full report, which goes into more detail on all of the scientific content in this talk today, is available now. And Chapter A, the executive summary, provides a great overview of the findings and is a really good jumping off point. The rest of the chapters go into further detail on individual topics of interest. The interactive data visualization website made by the USGS Viz Lab team provides a plain language summary of the report's key findings and contains a whole collection of interactive charts and maps that let you further explore the underlying data and visualizations, including a lot of the visuals that you saw here today. And if you want to access the underlying data directly, the National Water Availability Assessment Data Companion is the product for you. I'm the product owner for the Data Companion, and I'm really excited for its release today. So the Data Companion is designed for users of all kinds to allow anybody to easily access water availability information across the country. As of today, it contains water use information from the 3 largest use categories: irrigation, public supply, and thermoelectric power generation. Historically, USGS has summarized and reported water use information from state-submitted data every 5 years. But now through the Data Companion, we are able to offer water use data at a finer spatial and temporal resolution that's consistent across the entire US, rather than based on methods that vary state to state. And eventually, the Data Companion will deliver all of the data underlying the assessment report in one convenient location. These data are available to access through an easy-to-use API, a data file directory where you can download datasets over their full spatial and temporal extents, and an interactive subset and download tool where you can quickly get data over only your specific areas and time periods of interest. Thanks.
Thanks, Shirley. I want to wrap up by telling you a little bit more about what's coming next after this. Next year, we're going to be releasing a report that's focused on historical trends and regional perspectives on water availability. And then following that, in 2030, we're producing the first full assessment, which will include an update on the status of current conditions, an update on the historical trends, and also future projections of water availability. Thereafter, our assessments are planned on a 5-year cycle with reports planned again in 2035 and 2040. And finally, I just want to take a moment here to acknowledge everyone who's contributed to this effort. It really takes a lot of people to pull together an assessment on this scale. So I just wanted to thank all of the report authors, the modelers, the science communicators, the subject matter experts, and all of the managers listed here on this slide who worked so hard to make this happen. We also cited the work of many others in USGS and beyond to create a fuller picture of water availability in the United States as part of this assessment. Thanks.
Thanks, Lori. So for our last segment of today's event, our speakers are joined by the full group of report authors, and they're available to answer questions about the National Water Availability Assessment. We want to hear from you, so please use the Q&A function in the upper part of your screen to submit questions. We'll answer as many questions as we can in the remaining time. It looks like we have 26 minutes. If we don't get to your question, please email us at the address on this slide. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then I'll put the slide back up. So while you're working on submitting questions, I'll introduce the panelists, and I'll invite everybody to come on camera for a moment. Our previous speakers are joined by our additional report chapter leads. So welcome to Galen Gorski, a machine learning specialist who led the chapter on water supply, Laura Medley, hydrologist who led the water use chapter, and Martha Scholl, a research hydrologist who led the report chapter on climate change and water availability. So, okay, here's the inbox where you can get more information. And with that, I'll go over to the question bank. There's a lot of good questions coming in. So the first question is for our water use chapter lead, Laura Medley. And the question is, what types of data and information are the water use models based on? And how do these new modeled estimates compare to the historic estimates?
Hi, that's a great question. One of the things for the water use estimates is that these were dependent, the model estimates were dependent on nationally available data sets. Each of the models was created separately by separate teams, although they were coordinated by the National Water Use Program. So each model depended on different data sets. The thermoelectric model was an energy, heat and energy balanced. Public supply used a whole bunch of different data drivers. There's interpretive reports that describe the methods that are available. And the next phase of the model development team is to produce estimates for 2020 for the other categories of use, including industrial, mining, domestic use, aquaculture, and livestock.
Thanks, Laura. Galen, the next question is for you. Did you look at how much water is stored in groundwater? Is that included in this assessment, and what did you find?
Yeah, so groundwater is a really important component of water supply. But in general, estimating the total volume of water stored in aquifers is really difficult and potentially less relevant to water availability, as some of the water that may not be as readily accessible. And so instead, what we did in this report is we did what's often done, is to look at how groundwater levels are changing relative to some previous point in time. And so that's what we did for 38 principal aquifer systems across the conterminous United States. And then we looked at where those aquifers were either declining in groundwater level or stable. And so many of the areas that were consistently lower than in the past were in the southwestern and central U.S., places like the central and southern High Plains, and the Rio Grande aquifers and the Colorado Plateaus aquifers as well.
Thanks, Galen. Ted, the next one's for you. What were your supply use findings related to the Colorado River Basin as a whole?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So really, we did not find as high of limitation there as we expected. And we think that this is partially because we did not have good information on interbasin transfers. So, one of the big stories from the Colorado River Basin is the way water leaves the basin and goes to external basins. And that was not included in the models. So, that is a type of water use, and we don't currently have good information on the overall magnitude of the water leaving the basin. This is something we're working on incorporating in the future, and it does speak to some of the limitations in the kind of analysis that we did.
Thanks, Ted. Martha, one for you. What do your results mean for what might happen to our water supply in the future?
Thanks. Yes, our chapter on climate change and future water availability was an overview and synthesis of information compiled specific to future water availability from the global and national climate assessments that have been recently published in the last couple of years. There's a lot of information specific to future water availability, but we did not directly evaluate the effects of climate change on either the quantity or quality of water for this particular assessment. The background information in this overview will go towards informing the water availability projections and trends work that's going to be done in the future.
Thanks, Martha. Shirley, next question is for you. Can you share how the data companion can be leveraged by state and local water managers to meet federal safety and quality standards and keep their communities safe?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So right now we only have water use data in the data companion, but a lot more of other data sets are coming soon, including water quality. So definitely keep checking back on the website to find more new data sets all the time. And I would say that we've tried to make it so that it's really easy to get just the information over your area of interest. So if you want to get information for your specific county or even just your specific sub-watershed, you'll be able to do that easily through our website. And I would say that we have heard from potential users that one way that they want to use the data is to show how a specific issue with the water, whether that's safety or quality, is especially pronounced in a specific area. So if you also get the data over the whole country and show that, you know, there's a specific problem in your area that's really important, that's a really good way to tell people that, you know, that's the issue that's important for you guys.
Great, thanks, Shirley. Ted, the next question's for you. How do these new data change our understanding of water availability and scarcity? Any surprises?
Yeah. Okay, so two things I'd like to say about this. One is, one of the surprises was that a lot of what we found at the national scale using these national models was pretty highly corroborated by events on the ground. So if you look carefully at the maps, some of the maps that we showed in this presentation, and then that are also in the report itself, and we talk about this in the report, that there are, in many cases, places that stand out as having water availability problems. There's already literature talking about this, you know, so we're looking at this from this very distant, you know, kind of overview of the entire nation. And there are people on the ground who are experiencing this in one way or another, and they've already sort of known about this problem and have, you know, done some studies on it and things like that. So that type of thing makes me have some faith in the large-scale modeling efforts that we have, and it you know, gives me some optimism, I think, for the future and the way that we can use these models in the future in conjunction with the you know, the on-the-ground observations and work that happens by many people within the USGS and beyond. The second thing I'll say about that is the other surprise, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but that the way that, you know, the last set of slides we looked at where we had those sort of bullseye targets that showed where water availability issues were occurring, and the way that a lot of them overlapped, you know, and so that places that were having sort of quantity, you know, issues with water quantity also tended to have issues with water quality as well. And so, you know, as we said in the presentation, degradation in sort of one aspect of water availability quite often leads to a degradation in another aspect. And this came through really clearly in our analysis at the national scale.
Great, thank you, Ted. Lori, this one's for you. What are the estimates of when water will run out in different parts of the country? Our question writer is from Phoenix and has lots of family in Arizona. They're wondering, will parts of Arizona not really be a viable place to live in the next 50 years or less?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And thanks also to all of you for entering your concerns in the chat as we were going through. It's been a very insightful overview of the kinds of issues that are facing the country. So this question is a good one. There are questions in there or concerns in there about running out of water for irrigation, running out of water or compromising the health of our aquatic ecosystems. It's a very common question and is one of the central goals of our study on an ongoing basis, is to understand the factors that are affecting the ways that water availability is changing so that we can understand going forward where we may get the most return on investments in managing our water supplies. As we look toward some of our future work, I mentioned that we were going to be moving into looking at future projections, and we want to understand through those projections where might we see changes as a result of things like climate change, and where might we see changes as a result of other factors that we can control in terms of water operations, water use. And these are the kinds of trade-offs that we want to explore to help the country better understand what steps can we take to manage our water supplies and avoid some of these critical limitations going forward in the future.
Okay, thanks. Mindy, the next question is for you, and it concerns water quality and groundwater. So our question is salinity or total dissolved solids a major metric that was used in this analysis?
Salinity was evaluated, At a national scale, salinity is less commonly found at moderate or high concentration in comparison to arsenic, manganese, radionuclides, and nitrate. Salinity is, however, found at higher concentrations in some areas. And the report has a section and map devoted to salinity in groundwater.
Thanks, Mindy. Okay, so I'll keep you on for the next section too, or for the next question, which concerns groundwater contamination. And the question is, does the USGS consider occurrence data for groundwater contamination to be nationally representative?
The USGS does consider the occurrence data for groundwater contamination to be nationally representative for aquifers typically used by public water systems.
Thanks. Okay, Ted, this question writer says that they want to understand more about ecoflow values, how they're computed, and what metrics they involved, thinking specifically about like fish passage and other metrics.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I don't think fish passages were explicitly considered within that computation. So the map that we showed in the presentation and what was also used in the report came straight from a report by Darren Carlisle that was published in 2019. And the way they approached that question was to look at actual local ecological community health and relate it to the ways in which the stream flow characteristics for a particular reach related to what was considered to be kind of the natural conditions. And when they found places where there was a degradation of the ecological community and it was associated with a change in the kinds of stream flow characteristics that were there, they could then use that to estimate in places where they didn't necessarily have samples, whether there ought to be degradation in these other places or not. And if I remember correctly, the factors that they considered were things like flow magnitude, I think timing and duration of flow, the variability and sort of rates of change. So how bad or what kind of magnitude flood and drought conditions might be. And a lot of that is related to water management. So flood control, they might be downstream of a dam or something like that, that changes the flow conditions. So they didn't look specifically at the presence or absence of a dam, I don't think, but they looked rather at the flow conditions in the stream and whether they were associated with local ecological degradation.
Thank you, Ted. Mindy, we're going to come back to you for the next one. When the USGS says that groundwater aquifers that provide about a third of the public drinking water supply were found to have high levels of arsenic, manganese, radionuclides, and nitrate, can you clarify what that means for the people that are drinking water from those aquifers? Our question writer says, I assume, for example, that there may be efforts by water providers in those areas to remove those contaminants.
That's a really great question. Public water systems, so if you get your water from a public supplier, those public suppliers are required to meet certain enforceable drinking water standards called maximum contaminant levels. EPA sets those standards. So public water systems must treat water to meet those standards. Arsenic, radionuclides, and nitrate all have enforceable standards by EPA. Manganese does not. So not all human health benchmarks are enforceable by EPA. EPA is continuously evaluating, however, whether new constituents should have enforceable standards. For example, a new PFAS standard was just established by EPA. I want to just point out again, though, that domestic well owners are responsible for testing and treating their own well water.
Thanks, Mindy. Galen, this question is for you. Did you see any effects of drought or floods, and what were they?
Yeah, absolutely. So the period of analysis was 11 water years, but even within that period, there were considerable effects from both droughts and floods. So in 2011, 2012, there was a significant drought across much of the Great Plains in the Midwest. And that was below average rainfall for almost 2 years, which resulted in lower stream flow, and evapotranspiration and soil moisture, which according to our colleagues at NOAA, that drought was actually one of the most severe in the United States since the 1930s Dust Bowl, and it resulted in about $30 billion in damages. On the other end of the spectrum, we saw effects from floods, particularly in the West. For example, in California in 2017, we saw a deep snowpack and a series of atmospheric rivers that led to widespread flooding and landslides across the state, which had just recently been in a multi-year drought previous to that. So both droughts and floods really highlight the importance of long-term planning and interannual storage that's really important, both natural and human-made, which can attenuate the effects of water availability shortages.
Thanks, Galen. Martha, our next question is for you. What are the greatest threats to water availability with future climate change? And you're on mute.
There are threats to both water quality and quantity from climate change. Some of the major threats to both humans and ecosystems include increases in drought, aridification and fire weather, heavy precipitation and flooding, cryosphere, that means rain, snow, and permafrost. Cryosphere means snow, ice, and permafrost, so decline of the cryosphere, rising surface water temperatures, and saltwater intrusion in coastal areas, both intrusion in coastal aquifers and from storm overwash contaminating surface water.
Thank you, Martha. Lori, the next question is for you. There's several questions that have come in about interbasin transfers. So this is kind of a representative one. Could any interbasin water transfer be considered? Could a large portion of supply and demand that could be a large portion of supply and demand in the Western US?
Yes, it definitely is. And our methodology right now, as Ted touched on earlier, doesn't explicitly account for every interbasin transfer because there's really a challenge at a national scale at pulling together that information on a consistent basis. It is a challenge that's being tackled currently by our water use program, and they are looking for ways to quantify that information so that we can begin to build that into our water budget and water use modeling. So we do feel it's very important to get that included because we realize it's one of the major knobs available for managing water, particularly in the Western United States.
Thanks, Lori. Shirley, let's come back to you. We have a question about a user that has looked briefly at the website tool, and they're wondering if there's anywhere to get the water use estimates down to from a specific aquifer, like the Dakota aquifer or a specific state or county. They say it looks like you could only get down to groundwater or surface water for a specific state or county.
Yeah, well, thanks. First of all, thanks for trying out the website already. I do encourage other folks on the call to start looking at it and see if you have any other questions for us about it. So we take feedback like this really seriously because when we do user testing, that's when we find out and hear from users, that's when we find out what you all need. And so if we hear that that's a need that people have, kind of these estimates averaged over aquifers, we can look into getting that set up. For now, the original model outputs were generated on what are called HUC-12s, and that's basically a sub-watershed scale. So those are, there's about 80,000 of them across CONUS or the lower 48 states. And so that's kind of the scale that the data is on. If you are interested for now, before we have that kind of functionality in the website itself, in kind of generating those estimates over your areas of interest for yourself, you'll be able to use kind of your standard R or Python or ArcGIS type tools to be able to do that. We are providing the data layer that gives you exactly those HUC-12s, that spatial resolution. And so you'll be able to combine that with whatever other shapefiles or kind of geospatial layers that you have to average over the area that you want on your own.
Thanks, Shirley. Lori, the next one's for you. Will the data companion be updated more frequently than every 5 years?
Yes, so currently our plan is to routinely update the information in the data companion. And what routinely means is going to vary. So we'll have some new models coming online for the first time over the next few years, including additional water use models being developed through our water use program, some surface water and groundwater quality models. And then we are looking to continue to update those models when they become available, as well as the models that we use in this report, which includes water budget models for the United States, as well as some of those water use categories that we discussed in the presentation. The cadence of those updates is going to vary, and one of the considerations there is the availability of the data that are used to make those predictions. A lot of times we rely on information from other agencies, for example, the Census of Agriculture. And so we need to track how often those data are produced to help us update our model predictions. Another factor that may influence the cadence of those updates is the speed at which natural conditions change. So oftentimes in groundwater, we see slower changes than in surface water. So we may do less frequent updates of our groundwater quality predictions, for instance. So I would encourage everybody who is interested either in some of the new models that we're planning or updates to the existing models to check out the timeline that's available right now on the Data Companion website.
Thanks, Lori. The next question is for Mindy and Galen, and our asker says, I would love to hear from folks involved in the report preparation on some of the most surprising findings on both water quantity and water quality slides. So Mindy, why don't we have you go first and talk about water quality, and then we'll pass it over to Galen.
Great. Regarding water quality, we initially planned to cover a much smaller scope and scale in terms of the number of contaminants and the number of issues we tackled. We were really gratified to find such a wide range of national scale contaminant occurrence data and water quality models. So we were able to do national scale evaluation for many more contaminants than we'd initially expected. And so that was, I mean, a surprise from thinking back 2 years ago.
And I'd say from the water supply perspective, the broad patterns in water supply are well known kind of nationally. But I think what was particularly striking for me was even in 11 years of analysis, which was the period covered in this report, the amount of interannual variability, particularly in the West, surrounding precipitation and snowfall was really striking, and kind of an important point that came out of these reports. And then echoing what Ted touched on earlier, the overlapping, because the focus of this report was to be able to combine elements of water supply, quality, and use, being able to combine all of those and see where issues of water supply, water quality, and use were overlapping was really striking.
Thanks, Galen and Mindy. Laura, the next question is for you. Interesting question. Are you including water used by large data centers in your water use estimates? What do you think the water demand from AI is and its implication on U.S. water imbalance?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in the water use by data centers and AI. So if any of these facilities are supplied with their water by public water suppliers, they are included in the public water supply estimates that are available in the Data Companion. The estimates are not broken out by deliveries to specific type of users. That kind of detail and granularity is not available yet, but the water use program is striving to always identify new sources of data and ways to make the estimates more available or of greater to address these greater concerns. Data centers and facilities that do not receive water from public suppliers, those would be accounted for in other categories of use, probably industrial use. Those estimates are not available yet, but the estimates for 2020 are being worked on right now and will be available later at some point this year, monthly estimates by HUC 12.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Sorry, I probably should have given y'all a heads up that that was going to be our last question, but I see that we're at time and I want us to end on time. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Early next week, you'll receive an email with the recording of this event and links to the products that we discussed, and you're free to share that email. Of course, in the meantime, the report, the data companion, and the interactive website are available right now and can be accessed through our webpage. And you see where you can send us more questions if we didn't have time to get to your question. So thank you so much for joining us today, and everybody have a great day.